Would you like to hear a bit about the wondrous shoe puff? The water it sucks through its schnoz.
Alright, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy. Today we're talking about Final Fantasy X. There's a couple reasons for that. For starters, it is one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. If 7 didn't exist, Final Fantasy X would be my favorite Final Fantasy. We also don't talk enough about other Final Fantasies on this channel. The focus is usually about 7. That's kind of our niche here. So when I can get a chance to talk about any other Final Fantasies, I try to. But also today happens to be the 22nd anniversary of the game, at least in Japan, July 19th, 2001. Even though I say that Final Fantasy X is one of my favorite Final Fantasy games, it's one of my favorite games, right? It would be up there easily like top 5, top 10. I don't know where it would rank exactly because I'm a big fan of other games outside of Final Fantasy, but it's definitely up there, right? It's more than just one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. So what I want to talk about today is a memory I have of the game, because they actually put out on Twitter on the English account about it being like the anniversary and shit like that, and what are some of your favorite stories from Spira. I put it on Twitter. I've actually mentioned a few times in the last like week or two or so about the time that I was very, very terrible at the game. And this goes back to the first playthrough I had of Final Fantasy X. Now, I did not play Final Fantasy X when it was brand new. I would have picked up the game either sometime in 2002 or 2003. I distinctly remember where I got it from. I picked up the game from Game Exchange. We'd gone there for some reason. I don't know. I bought games a lot as a kid. Obviously I've been a gamer my whole life. I remember going into the store for something and looking over at the shelf, and I have a pretty vivid memory of this, of it was either the second or third shelf from the bottom, and just seeing the cover. Just seeing Tidus on the cover, standing in the water with the Brotherhood, just looking up at the sky. And just something was so captivating about the game at the time. What I can't remember, however, is if I picked up the game right then and there, if I went back to that Game Exchange and bought it, but I definitely bought it from that store. And I don't recall knowing anything about it. There might have been like commercials on TVs. I subscribed to Game Informer as a kid, so I might have read like some articles about it, but I wasn't super into Final Fantasy at the time. I don't even recall if at that time, if 7 was my favorite game. It might have been at the time. I don't recall. And I barely played RPGs. Like the only RPGs that I can think of that I've played were 7 and 8. And Legend of Legaia, which I've talked about on the channel a time or two. I've tweeted about it a few times. It's one of my favorite RPGs. It's so underrated. But I wasn't like a super RPG fan or super Final Fantasy fan. But something about the game was so compelling. That cover with Tidus, something made me buy that game. You know, I say I wasn't that big of a fan of Final Fantasy, but I definitely remember picking up Kingdom Hearts when that game was new because of Final Fantasy, right? Like, that's why I picked up Kingdom Hearts. I mean, I was like a preteen or so like I wasn't into Disney, but I'd seen a lot of the Disney shit growing up, obviously. But I didn't pick it up for Disney shit. I picked it up for Final Fantasy. So I guess I was kind of a fan of Final Fantasy, but I wasn't like trying to play all the games. Like I'd only played 7 and 8, and I picked up 10 kind of on a whim. And obviously once I played it, I fell in love with the game. I don't recall, again, exactly when I picked the game up, but I played it for a long time. I know I played it up to the point that I met my friend who introduced me to Final Fantasy IX. Now, I know I met him when I was 12 years old. I know he was at my 13th birthday party, but again, the time frame exactly, I'm not sure on. But I remember I was stuck on the game. I was stuck at a specific boss fight, which we're going to get to, which is why I sucked terribly at Final Fantasy X, and he helped me through it. I actually got stuck a few times throughout playing Final Fantasy X that I can recall. I remember getting stuck on the Seymour fight, but that's actually after what we're going to, kind of the main focus of the video here. I remember getting stuck on that fight, and like I couldn't beat him for the longest time, and then I remember scrolling down the list of Aeons and seeing the question mark, which was Shiva. I remember once I summoned Shiva, I just like beat his ass, like he wasn't that hard anymore. The main one before what we're supposed to be talking about this video was when you fight the Sin Spawn with Operation Mihin. I just couldn't beat it for some reason, and I probably goes back to what the main focus of the video was, and that's me not using the sphere grid. I don't know what happened there, because they give you a tutorial at like pretty close to the beginning of the game, like right after you join up with like I think Riku, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I played through the beginning of 10. I'm pretty sure like right after you meet Riku and you dive in the water and you like they introduce you to the sphere grid or whatever. But somewhere along the way, like I forgot about it. I don't know if I like stopped playing Final Fantasy X, went to play other games like for a while, and then came back to it and just completely forgot how the game worked, because the RPGs that I played at the time, the couple that I played at least, your characters level up. Like FF10 is super unique in that way. I think probably with the entire series, if I'm not mistaken, where you don't level up and just like increase stats. You have to use the sphere grid. That's how you increase your stats, right? So I guess I just forgot about that. But the entirety of my playthrough till I got stuck on the Moonflow boss fight, where you fight the big-ass machine underwater that snatches up Yuna but ends up being Riku, I'd relied on my Aeons. I'd used nothing but the Aeons throughout like the entire game. I've always been fascinated with summoning in like games, and I think I've always kind of attributed that to playing Pokemon growing up, where you use monsters to fight for you. And like any game that offers the ability to summon, I usually use that class or whatever the fuck. It goes back to like Diablo 2 back on the PC back in the day. I used the Necromancer or whatever it was, and I used to love summoning like the Blood Golem and all that other shit. I haven't played Diablo 2 in forever. Even when I played Diablo 3 a little bit last year with the boys, I was playing as a Necromancer. And then when I played like Elder Scrolls, I use Conjuration. When I played Elder Scrolls Online, I use the Sorcerer class to summon things to fight. I've just always been fascinated with that. And then obviously FF10 took it to another level with summons where they actually were essentially party members, right? They had their own stats, their own move pools, and all that shit. And everybody disappeared, and it's just Yuna and the summon got to fight. Like, it was so fascinating to me because I've only played 7 and 8 at that point, and you just go out there, they just do an attack, and that's it. And like 10, they actually got to fight alongside you. It was so cool to me. Actually, to be a bit fair to FF8, they did feel a little bit more like the party. Obviously, you equipped them to people, you taught them moves and all that other shit, but also, like, whenever you would summon them, like, it'd be their HP up on the screen, and, like, the Guardian Forces would take the damage for you. So they actually were kind of like the catalyst, maybe, to go into what 10 did eventually, sort of. But anyways, up until the Riku boss fight, like, my Aeons had carried me all through the game, and I wasn't quite sure how that's happened through most of my life. Like, as an adult, I think I looked it up eventually. Because you can only increase your Aeon stats by either leveling up Yuna. They kind of go up with her a little bit. I don't know what the ratio is exactly. And then obviously once you defeat Belgemine at different points throughout the game, she gives you the ability to increase their stats with items, right? You can use like power spheres to up either their strength or their health or whatever the fuck, and vice versa for any other stats. The spheres that match those stats, right, essentially. But that's all after the Moonflow fight. But it turns out I learned later on, as an adult, that your Aeons can actually go up based on the number of battles you do. It's something like, I think it's after the first 60 battles, their stats can start going up every 30 battles, up to 600 fights, something along those lines. So here's just a graph I pulled from a Game Facts guide about this. We're just using Valve for as an example here, but you can see like how many battles you got to do and how it affects the stats, at least according to their testing. And I believe they also said in this guide that you don't even have to like complete the fights. Like, you can just run from fights. You just got to do this many battles, whether you win the fights or run from them. But you can see that like how much Valve Force stats go up based on each of these like increments, every 30 fights, right? And I'm guessing this is the only way I was able to get through the game up to the point of the Riku boss fight. Obviously, like anybody else does when they get stuck on a boss in an RPG, you level grind, right? So when I couldn't beat a particular boss, I'd go run and fight a bunch of random enemies. I'm seeing my sphere levels go up. I'm not realizing that's not doing a goddamn thing, but in the background, the Aeons are getting stronger inevitably, right? Every 30 fights. And I'm guessing that's why I was able to eventually beat like that Sin Spawn with the Operation Mihin that I was stuck on. But obviously, when you get to the boss fight with Riku, it's just Wakka and just Tidus. There's no Aeons to help you there. So essentially, when I'm fighting that boss, Tidus and Wakka are practically as low as they can be. Like, if they're the equivalent of like level 1 or 2 or something, right? Their gear might be alright. They might have like the best weapons they could have at the time, the best armors they could have at the time. But because I haven't been doing the sphere grid, their stats are pathetically low, and that boss just keeps kicking my ass. And I think I eventually stopped playing the game because I just could not beat that boss. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't beat the boss. No matter how much I grinded, I could not beat that robot. I could not figure it out. And then eventually I meet my friend who who introduced Final Fantasy IX to me. And I was like, dude, can you help me with this? Because he was a little older than I was. I think he's like a couple years older than I was at the time. And I was like, dude, can you help me? I just can't, like, you're a fan of Final Fantasy. We're playing Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and 9 together. Like, I've been stuck on Final Fantasy 10 forever at this point. Can you help me? And he couldn't figure it out for a minute either. And then he eventually went through the menus and discovered the sphere grid. And I probably had, I don't even know, dude. It could have been 50, 60, 70 levels on each character. Whatever it would be generally by the time you get to the Moonflow. Probably a little bit more because I'd been grinding my ass off trying to beat these bosses, not realizing my stats aren't going up. But I had a lot of sphere levels. And so once he figured out how the sphere grid worked, and he leveled up Wakka and Tidus, I completely destroyed that boss. It isn't really surprised because I don't think it's meant to be a hard fight. Like, I've watched a lot of playthroughs of 10, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody get stuck on that. I think the Sin Spawn I mentioned earlier from Operation Mihin is a little bit of a wall. Like, I think if you're not leveling enough, like, that could be a bit of a hard fight just because the mechanics and stuff like that. I don't know for sure. Like, I don't know exactly what are considered the hard fights, other than like the scene where you fight on Mount Gagazet. I know that's like a wall for a lot of people. But yeah, once I used the sphere grid, the Riku machine boss fight was insanely easy. And it was so frustrating and so embarrassing once I had it showed to me. Like, once he showed me, like, hey, here's the sphere grid. You got to level up. You got to use 1 point to move the thing, and you got to use these spheres to unlock your stats and abilities. I'm like, God damn it, I'm stupid. I'm so fucking stupid. Kind of funny to look back on. I think it is possible to beat that fight without using the sphere grid, because there are like no sphere grid runs. There's like level 1 no sphere grid runs of FF10, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think I've heard Dan's Go 8 talk about that, right, on his channel. That's kind of what his channel is, I think, based on, right, if I'm not mistaken. I believe his channel name is like Dark Anima No Sphere Grid 08. I think is what it's supposed to be, right? So I think it's possible to do a run of the game with no sphere grid. I just don't know how you do it. Like, maybe like Auto Phoenix. I know that's a big part of those kinds of runs. I've been watching his auto attack or whatever, his only attack playthrough he's been doing on YouTube. So it's possible to do it, but you definitely need like Phoenix Downs because you're going to die a lot, especially if you're not increasing your stats with the sphere grid. Memories I have about FF10, for one, it's the first game that ever made me cry. I distinctly remember that shit because I played it for so long, right? I played the game over the course of like 1 to 2 years, being stuck on boss fights, taking breaks from the game, etc., etc. That me and the same friend, we beat the game together. We might have even started like a fresh playthrough at one point with each other, or whatever the fuck. But it took me a long time before I ever seen the end of the game. So whenever obviously Tidus dies essentially, or goes back to disappear, whatever the fuck, like that shit was emotional. Like whenever he goes, Yuna runs to like hug him and she falls through him and shit, and they can't even like hug. And she also says "I love you" and he doesn't say it back. But I've later learned in more recent years because of Resonant Arc, they're like when they do discussions on games, that's like an English thing. Like in the Japanese version of the game, she doesn't say "I love you." She says like "thank you" or something, which is it's weird because like the English version of that is so much better. Because why wouldn't she say "I love you," especially if she knows he's about to die? But that hit me like a fucking freight train. I didn't get emotional at that age. I've said it before on the channel a bunch. I was like a hardened teenager. Nothing made me emotional, but I guess I was just so attached to these characters that ending just got me emotional. I also remember, just like most people that have played FF10, being stuck on like the Chocobo minigame, the last one where you had to race the bitch, and you got to get like 000 to like unlock Tidus's like weapon. I think it is. It's either one of his, either the weapon or the fucking sigil. I don't remember what it is. I'm not the FF10 expert here, but I remember being stuck on that for quite a while. And then I remember like late one night on the weekend, me and my friend are gaming. And I just remember getting it like really late, like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning or something. We're both tired as fuck, but we just kept going and going trying to get this shit. And eventually succeeded, and it couldn't be more fucking ecstatic. And in more recent times, I actually tweeted this out last year. I finally did it. Like I've never done it myself because he did that like back in the day. And as I've tried throughout the years, I could never do it. And I remember following Dan's Go08. The dude, he's the GOAT when it comes to FF10. Like his methods and the tips he gives you in his videos for completing that race, like I did it in like 20 minutes. I imagine if you're a Final Fantasy X fan, you've probably seen the guy's channel, but if you haven't, he has an entire series for platinum in the game. If you want to get the platinum for FF10, he's got an entire playthrough guide for that shit. I'm telling you, he's the best when it comes to 10. To this day, I've still never done the lightning dodges, just because 200 is an astronomical number. There is, again, thanks to his guides, there's a way to manipulate it. There's a particular crater you can go to that's right next to one of the lightning towers, and you can run back and forth and just dodge the specific lightning bolt that's always going to spawn when you go to the crater. I just haven't set the time aside to platinum the game, but I do want to do that because it's one of my favorite games of all time. I want to get the platinum on it. Another memory I have for FF10 that I've wanted to talk about before, I wanted to put it on Twitter, just haven't yet. I might tweet it out at a later point as well. I remember my friend, a different friend coming over, who's also a fan of Final Fantasy X. I think he's a fan of like FF7 and other games too. I remember him getting stuck on the Sector 6 area where you get to walk and like you have to use that plank to get up, and like I remember him being stuck on that. And for me, I mean, I remember probably getting stuck there my first time as well, but like obviously I'd played FF7 a few times at this point, so I knew what to do. It's kind of funny. I literally went over to his house, and he's like, I don't know how to get around. I don't know what to do. And I just like walked up that plank. He's like, are you fucking kidding me? I was like, yeah, dude, it's pretty easy. But yeah, anyways, he brought over his like memory card. He wanted to show me his version of FF10, show off like his characters, his stats, his Aeons and other stuff. And I think his memory card was in memory card slot 1. Mine was in 2. And I remember loading up my game to like show him some of my shit, because I think it was a little bit further than him, and I had like better characters and stats and shit and Aeons. Probably had Aeons he didn't even have and shit. I think I showed him off like the Magus sisters and stuff. But I remember, just because I'm so used to playing by myself, that I saved over his fucking save file. I remember like going to like we did some shit on my file, and I went to like save it, and I was just doing memory card slot 1, the top file, just rapidly saving like I usually do, and completely overwriting his entire game. And I don't remember him being like pissed, but I'm sure he was upset. I think that'll about do it for the video, my dudes. I just want to talk about that specific moment, that time whenever I was really shitty at Final Fantasy X. I feel like I'm pretty decent now. Again, I'm not the master by any stretch of the imagination. But also I want to reminisce on like other aspects of FF10, other memories that I have of the game, and talk about things I've never really talked about in regards to playing Final Fantasy X, part of why it's one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. I just have these fond memories that are just locked in my brain that I've never forgot through the last 22 years, essentially. Of course, pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on the Final Fantasy X? Have you played it? Is it one of your favorite games like it is mine? Do you have any fond memories of the game? Have you ever got stuck on a boss fight and never used a sphere grid? Have you ever erased your friend's profile from Final Fantasy X? Because I've done all those. Anyways, this video, my dudes. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search notes in the description below. Follow me to _davidbusiness. That's it. Bye.
And that, as they say, is that.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.